This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. On the podcast, you get short business episodes, short private equity episodes, interviews with business and private equity leaders, as well as once in a while, my irrelevant or irreverent episodes on just topics that come through our lives, almost like Tuesdays with Maurice, but ridiculousness with Scott. But those are the sort of core types of episodes you get here. Here are 10 stories we're following this morning. First, futures are relatively flat this morning, leaning a little bit up. That, of course, changes throughout the day. It's June 8th, 2024 today. Second, the NASDAQ is up 24% plus year to date. That's an incredible run this year. We'll see if that holds. Third, the S&P 500 is up 17 plus percent year to date. Also a great year for the S&P. Fourth, consumer spending, which makes up 70% of the economy, is starting to falter. People are seeing that. That's a key part of the economy that has shifted into reverse. There's a great article on this in CNN Business. That's important on a lot of levels, both for the economy, but also for Fed watchers, what it means for what the Fed will do next. Fifth, unemployment for the first time in a long time has risen above 4%. It's at 4.1%. That's the first time it's been above that number or close to that number since September 2021. Sixth, one of the market research firms, and this is recorded today, is bearish on the market, says that the S&P 500 will plunge 32% in 2025 as a recession finally hits the U.S. That's certainly possible. It's hard to have a recession when your deficit spending at $2 trillion a year, but I think it's possible we will get there. Again, our seventh point today is that the ups and downs in the market and the economy are key reasons to really understand your allocation of your own portfolio. Obviously, when the market is going up, anybody who's got too much money in cash and bonds feels like they're missing the boat. The flip side is you have to breathe through that and be ready to live with when the market goes down. What allocation could you live with if the market falls? For example, if the market falls 32%, and I was fully in equities, I'd be very upset, even if it went up 30% the year before. Just the losses hurt more than the wins. So you ultimately have to figure out your allocation that works for you. Our eighth story is not really a story. We'll just point out 5 or so of our most listened to guests on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. These include Arden Edelcup and Mark Bailey of Trans World Advisors, Tim Fry and Gretchen Townsend of McGuire Woods, Julie Yu, the brilliant leader at Andreessen Horowitz, who heads up biotech and healthcare there, Eric Recker, another brilliant leader, and 2 more people from McGuire Woods, David Pivnik and Amber Walsh. And finally, I'll note Anthony Scaramucci from Skybridge, who talks about sort of crypto and all kinds of other things on the podcast. 9th story we're following today. We'll have a separate podcast on this as we dig into it further. But somebody had recently asked me about the status of PE healthcare transactions, and I'll give 4 quick points. One of these is thanks to Brian Greenberg, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the first point is practice and bolt-on transactions have become quite cautious. Increased margin issues coupled with debt cost, making that challenging. Also, increased regulatory issues from state to state as states sort of put their finger down on private equity transactions. Second trend, medical device deals still very much rocking and moving forward. Third, biotech is again accelerating and harder than it's been in years. Footnoted by a deal this morning where Eli Lilly decides to buy U.S. biopharm company Morphic Holdings for about $3.2 billion. It's an irritable bowel disease company, but again, that was in Bloomberg this morning. Again, rebounding there. Fourth, Brian Greenberg says that the market for revenue cycle transactions remains very busy, and I think he's right on that as I see that. Finally, the 10th story we're following today, and just a few points we'll point out. I loved again listening to the Peter Thiel book, 0 to 1. Peter Thiel, whether you like him or not, incredibly intelligent. I also enjoyed tremendously, gentlemen, Naval Ravikant's, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I found it very interesting, much more so than I might have expected. And then finally working on two other books, Charlie Munger's Almanac, the Charlie Munger Almanac, and a book called Bloodlands, about how much death and dying there was between Germany and Russia in the last 100 years or so, and they call it Bloodlands. Fascinating story. Again, those are 10 stories that we're following today. We'll be back with you today with 12 stories we're following this week, a separate podcast on recovering from injury, and finally a talk on these private equity trends in just a little bit more detail. Thank you so much for listening to the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast.